Okay, welcome everyone to the video explaining the QQMS assignment for Read 960. This assignment is a really important assignment to me because the goal of Reading 960 is that you learn how to take any kind of text given to you, whether it's a chapter from a book, a chapter from a textbook, a scholarly article, an essay, whatever kind of text you're given in a class, and that you understand how to break it down. And so because that's the goal of the class, this assignment is really important to me. So in this video, I'm going to walk through how to do it, and please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so first, let's define it. What is a QQMS? A QQMS is a note-taking strategy, and the QQMS, they all stand for something, and I'm going to go over what those are. It's going to help you demonstrate the following. First, your ability to ask good scholarly questions about what you read. Good readers ask good questions. So as you're reading, you should be critically thinking about the content that you're reading about. And if you have questions that you're asking in your head, you should pay attention to those and write them down in the margins. That's a form of annotation. It's really important that you do that. That way, when you go to class, you can always say, hey, professor, page 3, I had a question, and you already wrote it down in the margin, so your question that you had while you were reading is perfectly preserved. So good readers ask good questions. So a QQMS assignment asks you to document that. Next, it'll demonstrate your ability to recognize and pull out good, important, or emotional quotes from the excellent writing. Lauren Slater is an excellent writer. That's one of the reasons why I love this book so much. So as you're reading, please pay attention to those really poignant or powerful passages that are in the chapter, and pull out the ones you really like, the ones that resonate with you, the ones that make you angry or make you laugh or make you question something, or just seems really important. So those are the passages you're going to want to start to mark in your text as you're reading, and then you'll get to pick your favorites at the end for this assignment. And then it's also your ability to retell the chapter in the order it was told to you. Lauren Slater is going to tell you a story in each chapter. Can you tell me the story that she told? You're going to make a list everything that happened. Then your ability to understand how this chapter contributes to the book overall. So remember, Lauren Slater, in the introduction, which I'm going to go over in these upcoming slides because I use the introduction as an example on how to do this assignment, but she's asking these really big questions. She's picked 10 psychological experiments that she thinks answers the question of who are we? Who are we? What makes us human? Okay, so we want to be thinking about how the chapter that she's giving us, or the chapter that we're reading for that week, how that chapter answers those questions. All right, so that's what a QQMS is, and now let's define it a little bit more specifically. So first, let's go to the first Q. The first Q stands for the question. All right, so you are going to record a very specific question. Now, we're going to get into contract grading, and if you have the directions up for the QQMS assignment, they are linked in content. If you have those directions up, what you'll notice is that there's a contract grading portion for this. What it means is you're allowed to put, you get to know what kind of grade you want based on how much effort you put into this assignment. So for the question and the quote, if you only want to ask one good question, that's enough work to get a C. If you want to ask 2 good questions, that's enough work to get a B. If you want to ask 3 good questions, well, that's enough work to get an A. Now remember, an A is your starting point. If your question isn't good, or you don't get the thesis right, or some of your major support isn't right, well, then your grade would go down, but at least you start out at an A. Okay. So let's talk about what a good question is. Good questions are not easily searchable. So if you ask a question like, what's psychology? Well, that's not a very critical question, and that's something you could Google and find the answer to in about 5 seconds. So any question that falls under those parameters is not a good question, and you should not be using it for this assignment. I affectionately call those asparagus questions. Once I had a student, I taught a book that was all about food. And I had a student ask a question on their QQMS assignment, and they asked, what is asparagus? And I said, that is the silliest question I've ever heard, because all you would have to do, first of all, how do you not know what asparagus is? And let's say by chance that maybe you have never seen asparagus before and you never heard about it, but you could Google it and in about 5 seconds learn what it is. And so that is not a good college level scholarly question. So no asparagus questions. We want questions that start with words like how. How is this happening? How did he come up with this? Why is this happening? Why does this happen? Why do we do these things? You could compare and contrast, you can understand causal relationships, but in general, make sure you have good questions. So from the introduction, I've given you 2. How is psychological research similar and different from other scientific research? Because when I read the intro, she goes through all of that. It's actually on page 2, where she talks about how the questions fascinated me then and still do today. More fascinating to me became over time as you grew older the means by which one explored these questions. The hypothesis, the experimental design, the detailed qualitative description, the breathless or boring wait for results. That sounds like the science experiments I did in high school. So I'm thinking that how is psychological research, how is it different from like a biology experiment or experiment you might do in physics or chemistry? Are they the same? Do they have the same parameters? Right? That's why I want to know that. Okay. And then the second question I asked is, why do people behave strangely in elevators? Lauren Slater goes over this topic on page 2 also. It's at the bottom where she says, let's see, I observed people waiting for elevators and had this as my salient question. Why is it that people continually press the button when they're waiting in the lobby, even though they know, if interviewed, that it won't make the elevator come any faster? What does elevator behavior say about human beings? Okay, so again, I want to know more about that. What does that mean? What is elevator behavior? Has someone researched that? I mean, I've noticed when you get in to an elevator, you're in this close and confined space with people you don't know, and people behave differently then. So what does that mean? So again, once you ask your question, then you need to explain why you picked it. All right. And so I've expanded here on one of my questions, which was, why do people behave strangely in elevators? And I explained why I asked it. So you kind of heard me do that in the previous slide, but you can see what I wrote there, just an explanation for why I asked the question. All right, that covers the first Q. Now we're on to the second Q. So the first Q was question. Now we're on to part 2, the quote. All right, so your job when you pull out a quote is to write down one that was your favorite, one that made you think differently, it challenged your thinking in some way, something that impressed you, made you react, made you mad, made you laugh, right? Or something that seems particularly important. So those are the kinds of quotes you're looking for. Once you pull out your quote, you're going to explain why you chose it. So here's an example. Here's my quote. It's from page 3. I have chosen 10 experiments based on the input of my colleagues and my own narrative tastes, experiments that for me and others seem to raise the boldest questions in some of the boldest ways. Who are we? What makes us human? Are we truly the author of our own lives? What does it mean to be moral? What does it mean to be free? Well, the reason I picked this quote is because I feel like this is what Lauren's trying to accomplish with the whole book. It sounds like she's picked 10 experiments, and each one is going to help me understand who I am as a human. When she asked, are we truly the authors of our own lives? I mean, I thought I was. I thought I made decisions that I'm responsible for. And so that's interesting. So I'm really curious about these questions and how she's going to use the experiments to answer them. So this quote looked really important because it kind of sets up the whole book. Okay, so there's your Q and your Q. Now we're going to move on to the MS. MS stands for major support. It also includes the thesis statement. All right, so here you're going to list the major support and use it to write a thesis for the chapter. So your first job is to retell Lauren Slater's chapter, tell it in the order that she gave you the information. So she tells things it's all a story of different psychologists. So the introduction is a little bit different than that, but all of the rest of the chapters pick one psychologist that did one experiment, and she tells the story of that psychologist and that experiment. So your job is just to retell it to me. What was the chapter about? What was the psychologist? How did she talk about him? And what experiment did they do? And what can we learn from it? So you'll see a pattern in the way the chapters are set up. So list what happened in the order that it happened, and then you'll use that to write a thesis. So let me go into some detail here. First, here's an example from the introduction. You can see that I listed what happened in the order it happened. We know that she started out with her little story about Amelia Earhart, the raccoon she pulled out of the wall of her house, right? And how that, even though the human was supposed to imprint on the raccoon, so the raccoon thought that Lauren was its mother. It seems like that the raccoon imprinted on Lauren more, where she became more and more raccoon-like, even in her appearance, by staying up late and not getting sleep. So that was the first thing. And then she reflects on this a little bit, talks about how she's still fascinated by science and the whole psychological experiment stuff. Then she talks about how she studied psychology in graduate school. She talks about how she wants to celebrate all of these things as story, right? Because the experiments that she read about in those different, scholarly journals didn't come alive to her. But when she told the story of the experiment, that's when it did. So she's going to tell us stories the whole time. So she's written this book in narrative form because she wants people to connect to the stories, because that's how we live, right? She tells us that she's picked 10 experiments to share with us that answer bold questions in bold ways. That's that who are we? Are we truly the author of our own lives questions? She tells the reader that they'll see psychology moving more and more biological in the brain, but that people still give memories meaning. So are we the author? So we might remember something, but who we are kind of attaches to that memory and is individual based on who we are. And then finally, she tells us that this book has been, quote, an exercise in writing about both science and art in order to look back on who we are and move forward and who we want to be. All right, so I just listed what happened in the intro in the order that it happened, okay? Then I'm going to use that idea and have it help me write a thesis. So I need to think, okay, so what was the topic of the introduction? It's kind of like just an introduction, right? She wants to kind of give us why she's writing the book. All right, and so it should answer what is the most important idea Slater wants us to know from this chapter. In this case, what does she want us to know from the intro? I think she wants to give us direction for the book and kind of tell us what big questions it's going to answer. And then I said, in other words, how does this chapter help to answer the guiding questions from page 3? Who are we? What makes us human? Those questions. All right, so here's what I wrote. In the introduction of Opening Skinner's Box, Slater first tells us a childhood story about raising a raccoon to help the reader understand the science and the art of psychological experiments before she introduces how the book will cover the stories behind 10 of the boldest, quote, psychological experiments that will help us look backward and move forward in an attempt to define who we are. So there is my thesis. It's long, but I usually have a lot to say. Okay, so that is kind of how it works. So QQMS, quote, question, major support, that includes a thesis. All right, those are the 4 sections. So we're going to try it with chapter 6. So the first thing that I want you to do is there's a video, and this is posted in content. So if this part of this video doesn't work for you, I'm going to try to make sure you can hear the audio of the video. But if the audio is not good enough or you want to see the video in full screen, you can go into content. So under chapter 6 of Opening Skinner's Box, I've linked this YouTube video there, and you can just watch it there. So either pause the presentation and go into D2L and watch it, or you can try to watch it here. But it's important for us to get some background knowledge. You probably don't know who Harry Harlow was. You don't know anything about him. He was a psychologist that did experiments on monkeys. Chapter 6 is called Monkey Love. And interestingly enough, Harry Harlow used monkeys to research love. And it actually has done a lot for the whole parenting industry. He has really helped people understand what they should do with their babies, why they should hold them. Why do neonatal intensive care units have mothers and fathers hold their babies right on their own skin, right? What do we know about holding babies all the time? Why do we do that? Why do we have like baby Bjorns and Snugglies and wraps where we wrap our babies and carry them all right on our bodies? Why do we do that? Why does it soothe them, right? So a lot of the ways that we care for children in society is based on Harlow's work. You'll have to decide what you think, because the experiments, in order to figure this out, as Lauren warned you, are kind of cruel. All right, so this is a short video. It's 6 minutes, and it'll give you some background knowledge, and that will help you read the chapter. So I'm going to press play on the video now and let you hear it. Again, you can watch it here in this video, or you can go back into content and watch it there.
Show you a monkey raised on a nursing wire mother. Now here are 106's two mothers. As you can see, it was weaned on a wire mother. Here's baby 106. Watch. He's going to the wire mother. Stop to eat to live. Going back. He's back on the cloth mother, and he'll stay on the cloth mother. Actually, this baby spends 17 to 18 hours a day on the cloth mother, and less than 1 hour a day on the wire mother. We had predicted that the variable of contact comfort would be a variable of measurable importance, but we were unprepared to find that it completely overwhelmed and overshadowed all other variables, including those of nursing. Frankly, Doctor, if it comes to a choice between wire and cloth, it's reasonable to expect that any child will go to the cloth. It's a matter of creature comfort, like a baby with its blanket. But is this really love? Well, what do you mean by saying that a baby loves its mother? Certainly one thing we mean is that it gets a great feeling of security in the presence of the mother. Now, Mr. Collingwood, wouldn't you say that if you frightened a baby, that it went running to its mother, was comforted, and then all the fear disappeared and was replaced by a complete sense of security that that baby loved its mother? Now, in this experiment, this is the apparatus we use. That looks diabolical. That's just the way the baby monkey feels about it. Flashing eyes, loud sound, moving mechanical parts, all of these things are designed to frighten a monkey. Now here we have a peaceful, resting baby monkey. Let's find out what his reactions to his mother are when we frighten him. He's scared, all right, and he does what any child will do in a similar situation. He runs away. It's more than running away. He was running to his mother, to touch her, to drive away his fear. Contact with the mother changes his entire personality. Look, now he's actually threatening the diabolical object. All right. This gives us part of the picture of the strength of infantile love. This is a 6-foot square room with a few toys and other objects. But to the monkey, it's much more menacing. We know that when our own children are taken to a strange place without their mothers, they are often overwhelmed with fear. This room is just such a new and strange environment for the baby monkeys. No mother is in there. Now, let's put a monkey into the room. Notice how cautiously he enters the room. He's searching for comfort, but nothing relieves his disturbance. Now we'll take the baby monkey out and put in a wire mother.
Now this one was nursed by a wire mother.
That's right, all his life.
She doesn't seem to help much.
Now we'll try the same test with a cloth mother in the room. You see the contrast in the behavior? Despite the fact that the wire mother nursed him, she could offer this infant nothing in the way of affection or security. But here the monkey, by rubbing against the cloth mother, as if he were seeking as much contact comfort as he could get, builds up his reservoir of affection and security. First, his body relaxes as the fear disappears. But above and beyond this, new positive response patterns appear. He now goes out to explore and investigate this new, strange world. He is now a normal, happy, curious baby.
Okay, now, next, why can't I get, oh, there we go. Okay, so now I want you to read chapter 6. Hopefully that experiment gave you enough background knowledge on Harry Harlow. You got to see him. You got to see him talk. You got to see the experiments. You got to see the cute little monkeys and the wire mother and the cloth mother, and understand that the wire mother fed the baby monkey and that the cloth mother was only there to provide comfort. So those are the experiments that Harry Harlow did to study love. All of that will be really important background knowledge as you move into the chapter. So your job is to read the whole chapter. So chapter 6 starts on page 132. So please pause the presentation here. I want you to read the whole chapter from beginning to end. It might be a good idea to write down the questions you have while you're reading, write them in the margins. And you might want to also underline passages that stand out, because as you can see, you'll be completing the first 2 parts of your QQMS assignment during your first read. Now, to do the major support, we will have to take that on a second read. So please just read, annotate for questions, and pull out and make sure you mark passages that you like so you can pull them out when you're done. So pause the presentation here and read chapter 6. Okay, so hopefully you've read all of chapter 6 and you learned all about Harry Harlow and all of his experiments and what his life was like and how it ended and how Slater ended the chapter. So now you can complete the Q and the Q part of your QQMS. So remember, to achieve an A on this assignment, you need to have 3 good questions. To achieve a B, you have to have at least 2. And to achieve a C, you have to have at least 1 question. And again, look through your chapter and pull out passages. So again, you want to pull out 3 passages for an A, 2 for a B, and 1 for a C. Go ahead and pause the presentation here so that you can go into the book and pull out your questions and your passages. Okay, so now that you've done that, you're about halfway done with your QQMS assignment. Now we're going to look back through the chapter and list what happened in the order that it happened. This is your major support, and I want you to make a bulleted list on your paper. I'm going to go through the first few with you, and then I'll give you some guidance on a few more, and then you'll get to finish the chapter on your own. Okay, so when you look at the very beginning, the first thing that Lauren Slater does is she introduces us to Harry Harlow. You definitely get an idea right away that he's not a very nice man. And you also find out that he wanted to study love. And according to her, quote, all the ways we, quote, ruin it. So the first major support is all about Harry Harlow, introducing us to him and how he's not a nice guy, but that he studied love. Okay, the next bullet, if you look, I've given you a screenshot of the next part of the major support, because she gives us a biography or some background information on who Harry Harlow was as a child and kind of what his life was like growing up. So you learn that he had this very cold mother that didn't pay a lot of attention to him. You know that he was an odd child, that he didn't really fit in. He was super artistic. It talks about how excited he was about that poetry unit. You find out that he went to Stanford and that he studied gifted children with a guy named Terman. Interestingly enough, they were called the termites, these kids. They followed, Harry Terman followed these kids throughout their entire lives, and he pulled out kids with really high IQs because he predicted that kids with really high IQs were going to be the next presidents and Pulitzer Prize winners and Nobel Prize winners of our world. And he did not find that to be true in the end. But that's what he studied IQ, and actually Harry Harlow worked with him. So he went to Stanford, studied gifted children, and then when he graduated, got a job at UW-Madison. And so again, that's just his biography. That's background information on Harry Harlow. So your second bullet for your major support is the biography of Harry Harlow. Okay, the next thing you learn next is that Harlow got married and moved to Madison, where he studied IQ. Now, it makes sense that he did this because he had studied IQ under Terman, so it makes sense that he did it again. But this time he was using monkeys because that's what they gave him in the lab that they gave him. So he used monkeys to study IQ, and then during those studies is when he realized that the monkeys were clinging to these towels, and that's when he realized, you know what? I'm going to study love. And so this is that transition. So again, this third bullet point for Harry Harlow is that how he got married, his early career, studying IQ and realizing that the monkeys were clinging to their towels. Okay. All right, next. He gives you some background information on like the theories at the time. So how did psychologists understand infant love at the time? And they had what you learn in this section is this idea of drive reduction. So we have primary drives, right? Hunger is one, thirst is one, and sex is one. So these are our primary drives. In other words, we try to make sure in our lives that we don't want these things, right? We don't want to be hungry. We don't like how we feel when we're hungry, so we act in our life in a way to avoid that by eating, right? We don't want to be thirsty, so we act in a way in our lives to make sure we're not thirsty by drinking. So it's called drive reduction, okay? And so that was the predominant theory of infant love at the time. A baby loves its mother because the mother feeds it, right? So drive reduction. Now, remember that Harlow is questioning that. And so that question is what began his entire career. So here's your next bullet point is Harry Harlow looking at the theories of the time and saying, you know what, I don't get it. I don't think that's right. And now I'm going to study this. All right, now I want you to keep going. Every time Slater introduces a new idea, make a new bullet point in your list. Here are the topics of the next 4 major supports. You'll have to fill in the details of them, but I've given you kind of the skeleton outline of the next 4 things that Slater talks about. First, you're going to learn a little bit about the monkeys that Harlow used in his experiments. And then he's going to talk all about that design of the wire mother that you saw in the video. Then it's going to be all about the experimental process. How did Harlow design the experiment to test what love is? And then what did he learn? Now, those are just the next 4. Right? Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that because Slater goes over Harlow's entire career and his whole life story. So there's more to it than that, but these are the next 4. All right, you fill in the details based on what happened in the book. Okay, now after you're done with that one, what happens after Harlow learns that love grows from touch? That's where you should be. At that point in his experiments, he kept experimenting. You saw a little bit of that in the video where he made those monster mothers. That was the thing that lit up and clicked and scared the baby. He moved on to that. So you're going to want to look at the chapter to see how he modified those experiments, how he presented them to the whole psychological community, what happened when he realizes he was totally wrong, what kind of experiments he did later, and how his whole career went after the first big experiment. Okay, so list what happened, get the whole story, Harlow's whole life story. And then Slater at the very end of the chapter, you remember because you've already read it, you know, she visits a monkey lab and she has lots of questions as she's holding this baby monkey, and she actually even pretends it's Harlow. It's kind of a funny ending. Okay, so you try list what else happened in the chapter. All right, so after the major support, the last thing you're going to do is write a thesis for the chapter. So the first thing is for you to think about, what's the topic? What is the chapter about? So this one's easy, right? What was the chapter about? It was about Harry Harlow. It was about studies on monkeys. It was about what we learned about babies and parenting and attachment and love and motion and play and how all of those things matter, right? So what was the chapter about? Write it down. Because then what does Slater want us to know about all of that? What does she want us to know about these early experiments on monkeys? What does she want us to know about all of the things that Harlow learned and what happened to the monkeys? What does she want us to know about all of that? And for that, you're going to want to look towards the end of the chapter. So you're going to go, let's see, page 153. If I were you, I would start there. Everywhere I go, there are animals. I would start there and I would reread the end of the chapter. This will be your third time. And remember, you're trying to figure out what is that main point. What does Slater want us to know? How does this chapter answer the question of who are we? What makes us human? Are we truly the authors of our own lives? And what does it mean to be moral? What does it mean to be free? How does she address that in those last couple pages of the chapter? Pause the presentation here. I want you to reread the last few pages of that chapter and then come back. Okay, now here's your sentence starter. In chapter 6 of Opening Skinner's Box, Lauren Slater tells the story of what? There's your topic, right? Tells the story of Harry Harlow, tells the stories of the experiments done on monkeys by Harry Harlow to determine love, right? There's your topic. Now, what does she want us to know about that? When you reread the very end, she's going into a lot of the ethical issues behind the animals and the experiments. You know from reading the chapter that the animals, those monkeys that are so close to humans, right? They have these little souls, these little spirits, and he broke them. They ended up being crazy. And then he had that horrible rape rack, and he had these motherless mothers they were mothers of these babies, and they'd never even seen another monkey, and then they destroyed those babies and all of the horrible things that happened. And how does Lauren feel about that? What does she want us to know? Who are we? What makes us human? What does it mean to be moral? So take a minute, think about all that, write down some ideas. Okay, hopefully you paused the presentation there and you did some thinking. I'm going to share my thesis now with you. You can write down my thesis for this first QQMS assignment, especially since this video is trying to teach you how to do it. Or you can write down mine and try to write down your own as well. I would really appreciate you trying this. Remember, the goal is not to read my mind and write down what I would think. I want you to write down what you think this chapter means. So I wrote, in chapter 6 of Opening Skinner's Box, Lauren Slater tells the story of Harlow's cruel experiments to learn about love and parenting. And Slater concludes that what Harlow did to the monkeys was wrong, when we could learn what he learned another way, that as humans we are responsible for how we treat animals. Okay, so that is what I pulled out as the thesis. That's what she wants us to know about Harry Harlow and monkey love. All right, when you're done with your QQMS assignment, you will submit it to the assignment folder. I've given you a lot of guidance here, so I'm hoping to see that guidance directly reflected in your assignment. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have fun doing this.